Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the home of Chicken Licken. And I'm not giving any preference to any fast food groups. What I am trying to illustrate to you that in South Africa, every time an acorn falls and hits us on our head, we think the end of the world is nigh. You know the story of Chicken Licken, I'm sure. Chicken Licken was walking through the forest one day, an acorn fell on his head, and he went off to go and tell his friends, and he came across his friends. They were oddly named birds like Ducky Lucky, and he went to Ducky Lucky and said, "Ducky Lucky, did you know the sky's falling on our heads? We must go and tell the king." So Chicken Licken and Ducky Lucky went off, and they went through the forest picking up their friends, and eventually there was a group of about 5 or 6 of them, and they came across Foxy Loxy, and Foxy Loxy licked his lips and said, "Hey, little birdies, where are you all off to?" They said, "Did you know the sky's falling on our heads? We must go and tell the king." He said, "Well, before we do that, why don't we go home for lunch?" Foxy Loxy took them into his lair one by one and consumed them, licked his lips, and that was the end of Chicken Licken and all of his friends. And that's one of the risks we face in South Africa today, is that we treat every inflection point as a point of deep crisis. And in the fullness of time, as I will try to illustrate to you today, yes, we go through deeply uncomfortable times. Yes, we go through discomfort. But boy, oh boy, can we please just get over ourselves? Where were you on 9/12? I'll tell you where I was on 9/12. I was boarding a Gautrain. It was about 4 minutes past 8 in the evening. My producer very kindly had dropped me off at the Gautrain, and I'd gone down onto the platform, and nowadays you can get cell phone calls on the Gautrain platform. It's very nice. And as the Gautrain was pulling out of the station, I get this call going, "He's done it!" I go, "Well, that's nice. Who's done what?" "He's done it!" And as you go into the Gautrain tunnel, you know what happens is the signal disappears. So I'm getting this mad woman shouting it in my ear, "He's done it," and I'm going, what the hell, who's done what? Has a husband won an award? Has a child taken his first steps, got his first tooth? And then I remember that on the Monday night there'd been a lot of speculation that Jacob Zuma was going to fire half of his cabinet, people like Rob Davies and Tina Joemat-Pettersson, and also the finance minister Nhlanhla Nene. And I thought to myself, who would be so stupid as to fire Nhlanhla Nene? He's done it. Do you know how long it takes from when you leave the Sandton Gautrain station until you get to Marlborough station? 2 minutes and 36 seconds. That's how long it takes for a cell phone signal to be restored from the moment you lose it to the moment you get it back. And do you know what happens in your mind? Nikki, you know what happens in your mind in 2 minutes and 36 seconds. You're a psychologist. You understand what happens then. In those 2 minutes and 36 seconds, I saw my children's future being stolen. I was cross. And I just looked at it and I just went to myself, you know what? I don't think so. This guy, he'd been in office for about 18 months. He'd been deputy to this guy, the world's longest-serving finance minister, and he'd been deputy to this guy who'd been in the job for 5 years, but he wasn't amenable enough, so he'd been shifted off. And Nhlanhla Nene, who'd been in the job for about 18 months. This time last year, we were at a big insurance conference, and I found out that he'd been a financial advisor in his time. And I said, asked him a couple of things, and up until the moment he got fired, most South Africans hadn't really heard of him. He was in the back room. He was a quiet guy, a sweet man, giant of a man. He still is. He's just not at the Briggs Bank yet. And so I said, "What's the most extraordinary thing about being the finance minister of South Africa?" And he said, "Nobody knows me. I've got clients. When I was a financial advisor at Metropolitan from Limpopo who still phone me and ask me about their policies. They don't even know I'm the finance minister." And that's why I'm so glad he got fired on that day. I went into that Gautrain tunnel believing that my children's future had been stolen, and actually at that point, I didn't know it at the time, and it took me a couple of months to work it out, but actually, we'd been given a new lease of life, because a hell of a nice guy didn't say boo to a goose. If we had still had Nhlanhla Nene as finance minister, we probably would have had a ratings downgrade in June, and we would have probably be heading for another one in December, because we didn't have a sense of crisis. We had this guy, the world's shortest serving finance minister, grand total of 92 hours. Where I live, we call a long weekend a van rooien. I'm just going off for a van rooien. And that means you've got about 92 hours to go and have some fun. Thank goodness that didn't happen. Sanity prevailed, and of course, we got Pravin Gordhan as our finance minister once again. We as South Africans are very prone to doing this. We like to go to the brink. We like to look into the abyss. But we're also very good at points of inflection of going, nah, you know what? Not today. And that's precisely what happened in the weekend after 9/12, as they call it in the National Treasury, is that South Africans got together, powerful South Africans, people in politics and in business, and they went to the union buildings and they said to the president of the country, apparently there were some quite rude words spoken during the day, but they just said to him, absolutely, not today. This is not going to happen. This is not part of the game plan for South Africa. This is not the way it's going to work out. And reluctantly, Jacob Zuma changed his mind and reappointed Pravin Gordhan as finance minister. I mean, as South Africans, if we had just 2 teams going to the Olympics at Rio, we would be guaranteed gold. The skating on thin ice team, and the shooting yourself in the foot team, I promise you we would probably bring back gold, silver, and bronze in those disciplines. Nikki, you say you can't see the future. And I agree with you, you can't. But what you can see if you divine the past is possible futures. I can just imagine the sort of conversation that I don't know if these guys talk to each other anymore. Certainly Tabo's not campaigning and it's all very messy, but you can just imagine around 9/12 if Tabo and Jacob had a conversation, you might think that Tabo and Becky might say to Jacob Zuma, so don't you think it's time to say goodbye to people of South Africa? And the president might be somewhere quite perturbed because he's wasn't quite sure what had gone wrong. For so many South Africans, the critical inflection points, and many people in the corporate world have got choices. They've got the capital, they've got the passport, they're married to the spouse, or at least they're looking for the spouse that's got the passport. Paul, are you single? No. Okay, just checking. He's got the passport. You know, it's 21st century and all. But a lot of South Africans begin to stretch and go, at the time of panic. There's a chief executive whose name I won't mention, of non-South African origin, who had house guests on the weekend after the 9th of December, and it was a very depressing weekend, and people were dusting off their passports and looking at family trees, looking for long-lost relatives that they could reconnect with, just to say, hi, we haven't spoken for a while, still got your passport, good, excellent, should we have lunch? And people are torn, and desperately torn, and in critical inflection points, people are torn between staying at home or, for the sake of their children, to go and do something else. You make your choices. You do what you do. That is your problem. But when you have people who are dependent on you, suddenly the game changes quite considerably. Now, we like to think in South Africa that we have a series of unique issues. We know this place. You mentioned it. Just that place. And we think to ourselves, hold on a second, this is an abomination. And it is. But I want to take you to a beautiful, now that's a nice place. I mean, nothing bad could happen there. Those camphor trees, okay, the camphor trees were planted by slaves. All right, that's not good. But they're going to last another 150 years. They're 350 years old already. They were planted under the watchful eye of a guy called Willem Adriaan van der Stel. We don't really remember Willem Adriaan van der Stel. We remember Jan van Riebeeck. We remember Simon van der Stel. Nobody really remembers Willem Adriaan van der Stel because Willem Adriaan van der Stel was a bit of a crook. Willem Adriaan van der Stel used money, believe it or not, that belonged to the Dutch East India Company, the Hera 17, to build himself a rural estate out of sight of the public eye, except the burghers of the Cape were quite vigilant. The Thuli Madonsela of the day, just an ordinary guy called Adam Tas. Now, you'll know Adam Tas because you have at some point in your life drunk Tassenberg, and you know it leaves a bitter taste in your mouth. Well, Adam Tas did the same to Willem Adriaan van der Stel. He left a very bitter taste in his mouth because he wrote to the company in Holland and he said, dear company, you won't believe it, but the governor has taken company money and he's built himself a rural estate. And you know what? It's massive. And the company would have sent back one. And today you do it by text and you go, lol, the gov, check what he's done, here's a picture. But it took them 3 months to get a letter to Holland and 3 months to get a reply back. So there was a lot of correspondence. There was lots of crossover. Some of the correspondence would have got lost because ships got sunk. You can imagine it was a confusing time. It took them 6 years. But by the end of it, Willem Adriaan van der Stel, oh no, there we go. Don't go backwards, go forwards. Never go backwards, Paul. Don't ever go backwards. Willem Adriaan van der Stel had been forced to enter into correspondence with the Dutch East India Company. And he sent this picture. This is actually a picture that he had done. And he said, "Dear company, I am doing you guys a favor. I know I've used company money, but I'm expanding the boundaries of the colony. I am doing what you want me to do. I'm protecting the colony. I've called this place Ver Gelegen. It's situated far away. It is so wild and dangerous at the base of these vicious mountains. There are wild animals on my doorstep, and look who's waiting at the gate. There are people armed with spears and sticks, and they want to do me harm. I am doing the..." And the company, "Oh, come, get over yourself. Come back, you are recalled." And 6 years after the story first broke in the Cape, Adam Tuss had been locked up in the dungeons at the castle in Cape Town. And if you've ever been there and they flicked the switch and you've sat in the dark there for 5 minutes, you know that it's a horrible place. He spent months there. Adam Tuss is hailed as a hero, of course. Willem-Adriaan van der Stel, we don't remember him. But my point is, we in South Africa, the Nkandla acorn hits us on the head and we think, "Oh my God, this has never happened before. This is a disaster. It is the end." You know what? It's going to happen again. I don't know when, I don't know how, but I promise you it's going to happen again. And you know what? You'll be okay. I just want to take you and show you, there's a little green line, and all of those dots resemble acorns, if you like. We go from Sharpeville, big acorn. We go to South Africa leaving the Commonwealth, big acorn. There's an oak tree in the form of Hendrik Verwoerd. I mean, he had a lot of acorns. We go through the Cold War, Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy and JFK. Everybody's getting assassinated in America. We go through the 70s, and we have the Soweto uprising. So Steve Biko gets killed. We survive BJ Foster, for goodness sake. We get to the 1980s and we have an oil crisis. We get P.W. Botha, we survived him. We then get Boy Patong, we get Chris Hani's assassination, but we emerge out of all of that chaos and all of that mess with the goodwill of South Africans very much intact. Everybody with a very common view that the status quo that has prevailed for the last 350 years in South Africa, exacerbated between 1948 and 1994, cannot continue. It is not feasible for it to continue. It is a broken system and a broken society. So a man you may have heard of, a guy called Nelson Mandela, gets released from prison and caused something of some excitement. And we go through an extraordinary period. 2008, there's a bit of a dip in this green line. This green line, if in case you're wondering, is the value of your money over 50 years. When H.F. Verwoerd came back from the Commonwealth meeting in 1961 after being kicked out of the Commonwealth, he introduced this baby. It's called the Rand. This one is 50 years old, minted 50 years ago. It's got an ounce of pure silver in it. It makes a nice ping. It's a truly wonderful thing. If you'd taken 1,000 of these in 1961, who was born around 1961? I'm not going to make eye contact with anybody. But let's assume that you were born in 1961 and your parents had on your behalf taken 1,000 of these big boys and put them into the JSE and invested them on your behalf. And they'd left them in the market and they'd reinvested the money and they'd treated it like an investment plan for you, an old-fashioned tax-free savings account, if you like. Look, $1,000 in 1961 was a lot of money. It's a good monthly corporate salary worth 83,000 Rand today. But if they'd taken just one good month's salary or 2 good months' salary and put it into an investment for you, how much was that money worth at the end of the 1960s? The 1960s, South Africa closed down, closed economy. Apartheid was a crime against humanity, said the United Nations. And it was. But you know what? The economy was growing at 6 and 7% because the lager closed in South Africa. By the end of the 1960s, your 1,000 Rand had grown to 4,329 Rand. And you know what? By the end of the 1980s, the compounding effect of the growth, despite P.W. Botha, had grown all the way to 20,000 Rand by the end of the 70s and 190,000 Rand by the end of the 80s. And this is through states of emergency, crises, murders, and one of the worst political systems ever devised by humanity. By the time we get to 1994, the JSE is only just beginning to come to life. It has a bit of a blip in 2008. Global financial crises will tend to do that. But is anybody going to hazard a guess what the 1,000 Rand that was invested, Justin, you wear smart people specs, the $1,000 bucks that your mom and dad might have invested for you on your birthday in 1961. Today, what is that money worth? Taking into account that markets tend to double every 5 years, that the compounding effect, that South Africa's been through booms and busts with inflation, that we've had massive dividend flows, that South African companies have taken the world by storm, have seen incredible growth, especially over the last 20 years. I'll put you out of your misery. If I said 3 million rand, would you be surprised? You would be surprised. You're so surprised that you're about to have an allergic reaction to surprise. 6,400,000, I don't know, $6.5 million is what that money is worth today. That is with every single acorn that the bloomin' environment could throw at us, our political environment, self-inflicted environment could throw at us. South Africa has continued to do well. What happened on 9/12 last year? People panicked. The rand went to 19 to the dollar, it went to 25 to the pound, and people with money, who had a little bit of excess money, and people with money sometimes are very stupid. They phoned up their brokers. I've got a friend who is a broker who lost 10% of the assets under management in the 2 weeks after Sandton was fired. And he said, please don't do it. Gave them an instruction. They took their money and they bailed. They went. They decided they'd had enough. And you know what? Times aren't easy. It is not a lekker time. It's the best time in history to be alive, frankly. We hit a crisis in December, and thank goodness we did hit a crisis in December, because we were a little bit like a person who is denying the fact that they've got cataracts clouding their vision up until the 9th of December last year. And on the 10th of December, the cataracts were removed, and suddenly, for many South Africans in denial, there was a reality check. And psychologist, I want to go back to psychology the whole time, because you've got to acknowledge the problem to deal with the problem. And next week, hey, there's a big deal date going on. We're living in extraordinary times, unsettling times, difficult times. And right now I feel like we are stuck at a very interesting transition, because we are at an inflection point again, and many South Africans are really nervous and want to know the outcome of the election, but they can't know, can they? Not until the 4th of August or 5th of August, or depending where the ballot boxes go, the 6th or 7th of August. But the result will come. But we had the crisis of last year. And so we went and we stood on the brink, and we went, you know what? But what's happened since then is the most extraordinary exercise, because Pravin Gordhan understood that what he had to do was get people talking to each other, get people dealing with each other in a way that's happened at no other point in our democracy. So since the 9th of December, and then since about the 13th or 14th of December, when he was reappointed as finance minister, what did he do? He started picking up phones and working the phones and having meetings. Before the Davos gathering this year in Switzerland, Pravin Gordhan started phoning people and invited them to a meeting in Pretoria. You know what? Everybody responded, and they went. Went to Davos this year, and if you go to the Kirchner Museum in downtown Davos, you can't miss it. You can't go anywhere in Davos without going past the South Africa stand. It has served South Africa well for 20 years as a prime location. And every year, everybody floods to the Kirchner Museum to see the South Africa story, to listen to the South Africa story. They didn't come this year. It was the saddest, coldest, loneliest, most miserable corner of Davos, because they'd looked at what had happened in December, and Iran was coming out of sanctions, and Argentina was declaring free markets and saying we're open for business, and South Africa had said, well, we're just trying to work some stuff out here. But the best part of it was that Pravin Gordhan got to speak to business leaders, and Pravin Gordhan got to form a compact. They came back from Davos, they went into meetings, the president came to the meetings, they had a budget that everybody accepted, and after the budget there'd been meetings, they continued to have meetings. Boy, they've had a lot of meetings. What they need to do now is create something concrete and create some real options, because Pravin Gordhan's got to go and see the ratings agencies again just after the elections and go say to them, guys, this is the result of what we're doing. But for the first time in South Africa's modern democracy, business, government, and labor are talking to each other. I don't know if you went to the Titanic exhibition when it was here, but when you go into the Titanic exhibition, which is worldwide, one of these traveling exhibitions, you get given a boarding pass. And on that boarding pass is the name of the passenger. I was a first-class passenger. My children were in third class. That's how I treat them. And I was like a hell of a superior. I ambled through. And when you get to the end of the Titanic exhibition, you look on the wall and you see who lived and died. And I was delighted that my children had survived. They inherited quite a lot from me that day, because my first-class passenger drowned on the Titanic. But it did make me realize that the good ship Titanic is a very nice allegory for South Africa, because There are lots of people traveling in first class. There are lots of people traveling in second class, but there are considerably more people traveling in third class and who are working in the boiler room of the ship. And if that ship hits an iceberg, quite frankly, it is going down. And no matter which class you're traveling in, the water is bloody cold. You don't have much survivability. And Pravin Gordon has worked that out. Labour has worked that out. Business has worked that out. And actually, thank goodness they have. I don't know what the future holds. Nikki's told me I can't see the future, so I'm not going to bother to try and divine it. But I do want to... Silly bad red button. Bad red button. That is possible. That is possible. Now, you see, what's happening with my presentation, guys? What is happening? That is possible. There we go. That is possible. That is possible. It is, and quite likely. That until a month ago was possible, and then it was impossible, and now it's possible again because he's sitting in one of the most powerful positions in the British government. His name is Boris Johnson, by the way. He led Britain out of the European Union. That's already happened, and that's already happened. How far south can you get? I quite like where I am, quite frankly. I really do. South Africa's money story. A lot of people are worried about South Africa turning into a Zimbabwe, and I say, okay, fine. Let's just have a look at something. The MSCI World Index, 20-year view. It's up and down, but if you put money in 1993, you got more money today than you had then. Has the JSE, in dollar terms, underperformed, Justin, or outperformed, Justin? You're right, it has outperformed. God, you're good at this stuff. It's an extraordinary contraindication. You would never expect that to be happening. World's best performing stock market over 100 years? Australia. Second best stock performing market over 100 years? The United States. Third best performing stock market, Justin? Did you say South Africa? You'd be absolutely right. So, yes, we walk through the forests of uncertainty. Yes, the acorns hit us on the head. We go to the braais, we go to the dinner parties, we get despondent, we get the muddin, we get very cross, we consider our options. But I just look at it and I go, in a world of deep uncertainty, I just can't help but think to myself, at the various inflection points in our history, good people come together, good people make a plan. And you know what? There's a wonderful line in The Best Marigold Hotel. And the main character, Sonny, he goes, it'll all be all right in the end. And if it's not all right, it's not the end. But it is the end. Thank you so much for listening, ladies and gentlemen.